The HOA goons loomed over Alex, threats hanging like storm clouds as he bravely faced their intimidation. Meanwhile, hidden within a strategy forged in secrecy, retired Judge Timothy prepared his stunning counterattack. As the goons' confidence crumbled under the judge's revelations, their pleas echoed in desperation. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Timothy Hudson had always been a man of principle, a trait that served him well through decades on the bench. Now retired, he enjoyed the tranquil rhythms of suburban life with his family, cherishing every moment in the quaint, tree-lined neighborhood they called home. This community, however, was governed by a homeowners association, HOA, whose reputation for pettiness had reached mythical proportions. Under the tyrannical leadership of President Mr. Cronin, the HOA's draconian rules seemed to tighten around the residents like a suffocating vice, breeding resentment beneath the community's picturesque surface. The day began like any other, with the gentle hum of life in the Hudson household, until it was interrupted by an ominous message from Timothy's son, Alex. As Timothy read Alex's urgent words about the HOA sending a group of intimidating individuals to their doorstep, his heart skipped a beat. Unlike typical HOA letters announcing minor infractions about trash days or noise levels, this was direct and personal. The goons had come to chastise them for allegedly violating a seemingly innocuous rule regarding the exact shade of their lawn, a ludicrous premise made even more absurd when Timothy considered the lush green perfection of their yard, lovingly maintained. Never one to be easily rattled, Timothy felt an initial wave of disbelief swiftly giving way to a simmering anger, burning hotter as Alex described the aggressive demeanors and veiled threats employed by these enforcers of conformity. It was as if the simple beauty of nature itself was under siege, mocked by Mr. Cronin's petty tyranny. Here was a man, Timothy mused, who wielded his authority not to uplift but to control, turning the HOA into his personal fiefdom of fear and fines. The absurdity of the situation was almost comical, if not for its insidious implications. This wasn't just about grass. It was symbolic of an oppressive regime intent on dictating every aspect of their lives, from the color of their front doors to the length of their hedges. Mr. Cronin's HOA had evolved into something monstrous, an entity more feared than respected, its tentacles reaching into every corner of domestic life, choking the very freedom that home ownership represented. As Timothy digested this affront, emotions unseen since his days navigating the tangled webs of justice surged within him. He could feel the weight of his own principles bear down, urging him not to let this transgression go unchallenged. It was time for action, not just for his family's sake, but for the bruised souls who whispered tales of HOA injustices behind closed doors, their rightful indignation silenced by the threat of retribution. Timothy knew that standing up to a bully was never easy, but years of legal combat had equipped him well. Justice had always been more than a profession for Timothy. It was a calling. And now, in the golden years of his life, its call had become personal once more. Timothy sat in his dimly lit home office, a space filled with law books and framed diplomas, each representing decades of service to justice. His hands rhythmically tapped against the desk, a subconscious tempo to the thoughts racing through his mind. The message from his son, Alex, about the harassment by the HOA's goons played on a loop in his mind. Timothy's heart pulsed with a familial fury, one that was both protective and resolute. This neighborhood tyrant, Mr. Cronin, and his self-appointed enforcers had crossed a line. As a retired judge, Timothy knew the power of patience and strategy. His first step was to understand the enemy fully, to reveal their hollow threats and baseless enforcement of irrelevant ordinances. He combed through public records, delving into meeting minutes and financial disclosures issued by the HOA. Each document he scrutinized revealed a tapestry of abuse and manipulation, an empire of control built on fear and coercion. The exploitation was blatant, funds mysteriously unaccounted for, fines imposed without transparency or representation, and Cronin's own construction projects suspiciously approved without due process. Timothy's reputation as a fair and relentless adjudicator had earned him deep respect, and he decided it was time to leverage that in a different arena. Quietly, he reached out to his neighbors, people he once considered only acquaintances. Each conversation, held under the guise of casual neighborhood gatherings, unveiled stories of intimidation and unaffordable penalties for minor infractions. From the McMillers, who had been fined for planting roses instead of petunias, to Mrs. Oliver, whose fence had been deemed an inch too high, a common thread of harassment emerged. Each testimony added fuel to Timothy's fire, solidifying his resolve to dismantle the tyranny that had gripped their community. What Cronin saw as invincible, Timothy perceived as fragile, a structure ready to collapse under the weight of its own corruption when exposed to light. He meticulously documented each story, collecting affidavits and recorded statements, ensuring that each piece of evidence was grounded in legal truth. Unbeknownst to the HOA, Timothy conducted his own investigation, analyzing their actions with the same shrewdness that had won countless court cases. But more was needed. Allies were essential, and Timothy was strategic in his recruitment. He identified leaders within the community, individuals who held sway and who were equally motivated to challenge the established order. The tension in the neighborhood thickened as Cronin, blind to the brewing rebellion, continued to enforce his dictatorial mandates. Timothy's preparation reached its peak as the community, long subjugated, began to stir. Plans were laid, dates set, and a united front slowly emerged. They were readying for a confrontation, one that would not only reclaim their autonomy, but restore justice, a value Timothy had dedicated his life to uphold. The wind of change whispered among them, carrying with it the promise of liberty, as Timothy's blueprint for victory unfolded with the precision of a seasoned tactician. In the old community hall, sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, casting long shadows on the polished wooden floor. Timothy, his posture confident yet unassuming, stood at the center of a hastily convened meeting. The HOA members, once accustomed to issuing stern mandates and dismissing community grievances, now sat in silent anticipation. Local media, alerted by whispers of scandal and drawn by the promise of revelation, lined the back of the room, cameras poised like sentinels awaiting a storm. Timothy had spent years quietly observing, analyzing, and gathering evidence, aware that justice was a patient pursuit. As he began to speak, his voice carried the weight of authority and experience. He started with a calm and deliberate recounting of his initial surprise at the intimidation tactics employed against his son, Alex. His eyes swept across the room, locking onto each member, ensuring the gravity of the moment settled deeply into their conscience. "Many of you here were unaware of my background," Timothy stated, his words measured. "But it is time for transparency." He paused, letting his history as a retired judge hang in the air like a revelation. The collective intake of breath was audible, breaking the oppressive silence that had cloaked the room. The HOA members shifted, nervous energy rippling through their once complacent ranks. Timothy laid bare the corruption that had festered under Mr. Cronin's leadership, detailing financial inconsistencies, fraudulent fines, and the intimidation that had turned a community intended for unity into one of fear and isolation. Each revelation was a calculated blow, years of malpractice unfolding evidence by piece, stripping away any veneer of legitimacy the current administration clung to. Alex stepped forward, laptop underarm, an image of determined resolve. He gazed around the room before positioning himself beside his father. With a deft touch, Alex connected his device to the projector. The screen flickered to life, a momentary static dance that preceded the night's emotional centerpiece. The video rolled, chaotic yet explicit in its narrative. Words of harassment, aggressive posturing, promises of undue harm unless arbitrary HOA edicts were immediately adhered to. A duet of evidence, it was irrefutable in its authenticity. The room was transfixed, a silence so profound that even the creak of wooden chairs echoed like thunder. Mr. Cronin's once stoic visage crumbled, his immunity shattered under the unimpeachable glare of truth. The former aggressors, those who believed in their unassailable position, sat exposed. Stripped of bluster, their only recourse was a collective plea for leniency, their voices humble where once they were tyrannous. In that modest hall, a cascade of change began. Timothy's exposition of truth had not only unseated a reign of terror, but had ignited a thirst for justice among those present. As the video ended and lights dimmed, every attendee understood. Tomorrow heralded a reformed horizon, and it was justice that would guide their path forward. The afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the quiet neighborhood, its rays slicing through the tension that had long constricted Jefferson Gardens. In this community, dotted with well-manicured lawns and pastel-painted houses, a significant transformation was unfolding. Timothy Robinson stood at the epicenter of this change, surrounded by an assembly of supportive neighbors. This gathering, once characterized by whispers of discontent and fear of reprisal, now resonated with the unmistakable noise of jubilation and relief. Months earlier, Timothy, a retired judge known for his steely determination and sense of justice, wouldn't have imagined stepping into such a role. His involvement with the Homeowners Association, HOA, had initially been reluctant, more out of familial duty than personal ambition. It was his son, Alex, who had initially borne the brunt of the HOA's arbitrary rules under the iron-fisted reign of Mr. Cronin. What began as a parental urge to shield Alex transformed into a larger battle against systemic unfairness. The crux of this evolution came in a setting that was fittingly democratic for such a cathartic resolution, a community meeting held in the local park. It was here that Timothy presented the damning evidence of Mr. Cronin's corruption, meticulously compiled and compellingly conveyed. As he spoke, there was a decisive shift in the atmosphere. Whispered resentment turned to audible outrage, and then resolute support. The neighbors, who had once tiptoed around HOA mandates, now stood zealous and unyielding next to Timothy. The depositions of HOA officials, led by Timothy's unassailable arguments and supported by a chorus of community voices, marked the beginning of a reformation. The board members acknowledged the legitimacy of the claims laid bare by Timothy, although their regret was perhaps more practical than heartfelt. Pledges of future transparency and collaborative governance marked new beginnings, a sunlight-obscured resolution written into the HOA regulations that everyone demanded to be seen, heard, and remembered. Timothy's role in catalyzing this change was celebrated with fervor. Neighbors approached him individually and collectively to express their gratitude. Some offered handshakes, others baked him pies or left fresh produce from their gardens on his doorstep. His actions inspired a newfound respect, reminiscent of past narratives where David triumphed against Goliath, not with brute force, but through astute conviction and moral clarity. As twilight descended, Timothy found a moment of solitude on his porch, a mug of tea warming his hands. Overseeing the tranquil streets no longer patrolled by the shadows of intimidation, his heart swelled with a quiet satisfaction. He realized that the real victory lay not just in the restitution of fair rules, but also in the strengthened bonds and shared resolve that now knit this community together. As laughter and the hum of reunited friendships rose from the street below, the enduring truth echoed. Justice, once obstructed, had finally found its rightful place. And with it came the promise of harmony and hope, gleaming with possibility in the afterglow of this hard-won triumph.